Good to go.
All right. Today we're going to be going over technical session 25, laptop hardware. And it's kind of the beginning of the introduction into mobile devices. And depending on who you speak to, some consider laptops to actually be a mobile device, some consider them not to be a mobile device. So it just kind of depends on who you're asking with regards to that. And with the objectives for this particular session, we're going to be able to describe how a laptop functions similarly and differently to a desktop. What are the benefits to a laptop? What are the downsides to a laptop? Describe the functions and components within the display of a laptop, and understand installing and configuring laptop hardware components. Behavior skills and mindsets for this particular one are going to be communication. As we often say, IT is a team sport. You need to be able to communicate effectively with them and your customers so everybody understands what's going on. Before we ever crack a case on a desktop or a laptop, we need to make sure that the customer is aware of that. We have advised them as to what we're doing and why, so that they are aware and it does not come as a surprise later. And maintain a growth mindset for the ever-changing technologies that we are working with. All right, there's a few different types of laptops terminology that they tend to utilize. Let's see, William, can you please read this one for us?
Yes. Types of laptops. Laptop, a small portable computer similar to a desktop in functions, components, and hardware. Notebooks, similar to a laptop without the integrated DVD CD drive, and generally weighs much less for a better portability. Does not have extensive cooling capacity due to processing being significantly lower. Netbooks, quite small in size and are basically built for web surfing. Very low consumption of power. Chromebooks, can look exactly like a laptop, but run on the Linux-based Chrome OS. Super fast for internet and streaming and can run on Android apps. And the last one is tablet PC, hybrid. Touchscreen computer that can work with a keyboard as a laptop or independently as a tablet.
Excellent, thank you. Although I would state that more and more as we move forward, you're not seeing, CD and DVD ROMs attached to laptops at all anyway. And even to the point where we're moving away from them on computers as well. What would we use as a solid replacement for a CD or DVD nowadays if we're trying to install an operating system or something like that? What would be the preferred method at this point?
Flash drive.
There you go, USB flash drives. And Chromebooks, we kind of went over those where it is kind of a stripped down operating system on it. And netbooks basically for the internet. And now tablets are becoming powerful enough to a rudimentary level, they can be computer replacements if you're not doing a lot of heavy lifting on, with programs and stuff like that. If you're just using simple word processors, PowerPoints, Excel sheets, stuff like that. Tablets have become a really good rival for the laptop market and computer replacement market. And this was something that they did not really see coming because they never thought it would be fully viable to replace PCs. But if, the average office worker is only using, Excel, Office, PowerPoint, things like that. So it has become a very cost-effective replacement. Let's see. Now, the advantages and disadvantages of a laptop. Sometimes it's pretty apparent. One of the advantages is, laptop is portable. You can take it with you wherever you go. If you travel a lot for your work, you can bring that computer along with you. You can work on the go. You can do the vast majority of things that a desktop can do. You can do it on a laptop. Disadvantage of that, though, you are paying for that portability. The cost is going to be significantly higher for that laptop than it will be for a comparable desktop. Laptops tend to have a bunch of wireless options like Wi-Fi, airplane mode, Bluetooth, GPS, though desktops also have Wi-Fi built into them now and Bluetooth as well. GPS, I don't believe they don't have that so much, and airplane mode doesn't seem to make sense on a desktop anyway. But all those functions are built into laptops and are standard features nowadays. Disadvantages for a laptop, essentially, if you're going to try to do something like high-end gaming and things like that, more often than not, a laptop is not going to be up to the performance to be able to handle these kind of things. Or if you're doing, video aided design, CAD or CAM, laptops tend to not be able to handle that level of computing power. So you tend to require a desktop at that point. The other advantage is integrated input devices such as touchpad, trackball, pointer stick, touchscreen, stuff like that. Though we're starting to see some of this stuff in desktops like the touchscreen. The touchpad, that's a big one depending on who you ask. Some people actually like the touchpad. Some people hate it because if you rest your palms on the computer, which is actually bad technique, if you rest your palms on the laptop while you're typing, your cursor will jump all over the place and it can be rather aggravating. So some people tend to not like the actual touchpad themselves. But the disadvantage to having those built-in wonderful functions is it's not really easy to expand, build upon that platform. You can add some RAM to it, but you're not typically going to go in and upgrade the CPU. You can do an external sound graphics card for it, but not a lot of people are going to go through that kind of trouble, and you lose portability with it. Sound cards, a lot of that stuff for gaming, it's just not really viable to go ahead and do those upgrades. The laptop has built-in function keys since they're trying to keep things as compact as possible. If you look down on the corner of your laptop, you see that little blue button that says FN. If you select that, you should be able to have that number pad function, like the 10 key number pad, that if you do a lot of data entry, that becomes extremely nice to have versus having the number keys run across the top of your keyboard. So it makes for much faster entry. That is a wonderful new function, relatively new function for the keyboards, because it used to be if you were going to do a lot of data entry, you actually had to buy the separate 10 key pad to go ahead and enter it in. There's a physical cable lock on these laptops. There's a little indentation on the side where it looks like something's supposed to go there, but nothing actually fits there. It's actually a security device where you can put a little lock in there and actually physically secure your laptop down to a desk if you want to do that. Yes, PC cases have that, and you can actually physically lock the PC case closed so it can't be opened. So that is kind of a misnomer right now. Battery limits, kind of limits the amount of time you can be portable and not tied to a specific area for charging those batteries and stuff like that. And also, especially in early iterations of laptops, those batteries would really degrade over time if they were not properly maintained. Newer laptops have the rotating and sometimes removable screens, the little touch screens that you can put on them, which is a wonderful advantage over laptops. It does increase the usability of the device, where it can also mimic a tablet or be a tablet with an attached keyboard versus a large bulky desktop. The one big one is the drop hazard. And it's easy to steal something that's portable, so people can snatch and run with one of these pretty easily. And if you drop a laptop, there is a very high probability you're shattering that screen or damaging internal components within that particular computer. Questions so far with regards to advantages or disadvantages? Can anybody think of any other advantages or disadvantages to a laptop? All right. Components in a laptop versus desktop. Now, you'll see a lot of the components are similar in both desktops and laptops. They will serve similar functions, but they will have to be modified essentially to be able to function within a laptop, because in a laptop, you don't have as much real estate as you would in a actual desktop. Yep, I like that, Emmanuel. Smaller screens as well. Though some laptops you can get the bigger screen, but again, you're starting to sacrifice that portability. I've seen, the big 20-inch screens, but then those laptops just become massive if you have to do something like that.
It's really a desktop. Just that you
At that point, yeah, it's a desktop that you're just plugging around with you. So yeah, a lot of the components, they serve similar functions, but will appear differently in laptops. Like a motherboard for a laptop is going to be cut and printed, as you see right here. It's not just going to be like a square motherboard like the ATXs that we've seen before. They're going to basically print and cut these motherboards to be very specific to the space they're trying to fill. Now, that's a great thing. It helps with portability. But a huge disadvantage of that, can anybody think what the big disadvantage of that would be?
There's no standardization then.
Exactly, which means what?
It's gonna be like hard to find things that are compatible unless you go
Exactly. So every model, make, iteration of these devices that come out has a different motherboard that's going to be put in it. And it makes repairing them significantly more difficult, because you can't just order a generic motherboard to replace it. If you need to, you literally have to go back to the manufacturer and say, hey, I need X motherboard for this model, print it out so that I can replace it in my laptop. Or if you're lucky, you can find one on eBay or some secondhand shop for repair, but then it's kind of one of those, it's iffy at best when you're getting secondhand equipment. So the CPU in a laptop is typically soldered on to the motherboard. So replacing that is not typically going to happen, but it does operate off of lower voltages and clock speeds. Lower voltage is good, the lower clock speeds, not so much. Heatsink, smaller in physical size, so it's not going to necessarily be as effective as a desktop's heatsinks that's pulling large amounts of air through it. And if any of you have ever operated with a laptop sitting on your lap or sitting on a pillow to make yourself more comfortable, you're essentially just suffocating that computer. You're slowly killing it. It's going to keep heating up, and it's going to start damaging components and things like that. They were not meant to actually sit on your lap physically, even though they are called laptops. Yes, William.
Professor, I missed the beginning part. You just said that it's good not to have the laptops somewhere. You said on top of a couch or
yes.
Like okay, because got it.
The laptops should be sitting on a flat surface that but you don't want it sitting on top of like tablecloths, towels, blankets, pillows, anything, because if you look underneath that laptop, there's very, very tiny vents underneath that laptop, and that's how that thing breathes. That is the its sole source for airflow. And if you're restricting that laptop's going to heat up pretty quickly, and then over time it's either going to start crashing that computer, or it's going to start damaging those components, and it's going to shorten the lifespan of that actual computer.
Professor, I remember from work, before they would give us the laptops, a lot of them, I had to go out of my way, and I bought I think it's you raise it's like a lever. I don't know. It's like it raises up it keeps the laptop from being on the flat surface. It keeps it up in there. It's just like a regular plastic device, but it's
a little riser.
The riser, yes. What are your thoughts on that? That's actually,
those work pretty good. I mean, the whole thing is you're not trying to block the vents. If it's sitting on a plain plastic riser, it's still getting that airflow underneath it. That's fine. If it's sitting on a plain flat surface like a countertop or a desktop or something like that, then it's still allowing that airflow to occur. And they do have the cooling pads where they have the pads that you can set them on, and they have fans in them that will, you know, help kind of accelerate the cooling process. So those work out pretty good too. But the point is you want those vents to be able to have a clear path to work. Otherwise, the heat sink inside is not going to be able to do its job.
So clear path. Got it.
The hybrid ones kind of got the vent on the side, don't they? Because you got to fold the screen back to.
Okay. So some of them, yeah, will have vent on the side, but majority will have them underneath. So, I mean, I had a coworker who knew less about computers than I did, and we operated off of laptops with port replicators in the office, and then we had to take our laptops with us because we essentially, between the two of us, we had to operate 24 hours a day. And when he would go home for the day, he would literally just slap the laptop closed, yank the replicator out, and throw it into his laptop bag and carry it home. The thing would be on the entire time. So it's in an insulated bag with no airflow, cooking in the Florida sun, going from work to the house, which is about an hour drive, and then he would pull it out, open it up, and start working again. He killed 4 laptops in under a year, basically just by cooking them, you know, not properly shutting them down and just grabbing them and throwing them into his laptop bag and running out. So cooling is a big thing. You know, we got to make sure if we want this equipment to last a long time, we do have to take care of it. All right, memory. Unlike the RAM chips you would typically see in a desktop like this one here, we would see microDIMMs or SODIMMs that look like this. And what does the SO stand for in SODIMM?
Small outline.
There we go, small outline. So you would see the smaller memory modules, again, due to limited real estate within the computer. Hard drives, we did touch on this yesterday. Typical desktop hard drive, it's about 3.5 inches, looks like this. And then they actually made much smaller hard drives with a 2.5 or a 1.8 inch footprint, looks like this. And this was before the advent of the flash drive memory or solid state memory. So these would be smaller mechanical drives. They typically had significantly less storage. Their response times wasn't as good. But now that we're moving into an era of, you know, more solid state drives typically being the norm, and also that next iteration of that, the M.2 memory, we're able to put much more robust storage into these laptops. And also the same form factor, you know, the manufacturers, since they're becoming such good quality, they're even using them in desktops and just putting essentially an adapter in the place so that you can slide it into the 3.5 inch bays in a desktop, because they would function if they're just as good nowadays. Optical drives, again, for the most part, these are kind of going by the wayside. You're not even seeing them anymore. Heck, I don't even know if most people are even buying Blu-rays anymore, because you just download it and stream it or whatever, rather than actually buying the physical media. Granted, I am a fan of physical media because I like having it there in case something happens to my digital storage, but it's still going by the wayside. And especially in laptops, they were the first ones to kind of get rid of it. And even before that, there was the floppy drives. And if you remember back, not even 10 years ago, a lot of the laptops would have the removable 3.5 inch drive that you could replace with the CD-ROM drive, depending on which one you needed to use at that particular time. It was a hot swappable drive. You could do it whenever you needed to, or you could actually add another hard drive that way as well. So it was almost like a modular laptop, essentially.
I think that was pretty neat that they were able to do that, to service that same bay. But I do want to know, by the removal of the optical drive, what does this allow laptop manufacturers to do that we all would appreciate?
Add more ports.
I hear that, Chris. What you about to say, Amber?
Let's say maybe expand the memory on it, like
You
storage.
guys are looking at it from a different. There we go. It makes it.
Daniel's got
It
it.
makes it smaller.
Thinner, lighter.
You have to think about that drive takes up so much space and requires a certain size outline that you remove that. Now you really just have a keyboard on top, which is pretty small itself. And then the components within that drive actually made the whole body of that laptop that much bigger.
And it was becoming the determining factor as to the thickness of that body. So that was the main thing holding back the body from getting any thinners, because you have to have X amount of space to be able to have that motor, the laser, and all that stuff in there. Once you are able to get rid of that, you can crush it down about 50% more. That's also, you know, why a lot of these cell phone manufacturers were trying to get rid of the headphone jack, because the headphone jack was becoming the limiting factor as to the thickness of the actual phone. So they were trying to eliminate that because more and more people were moving towards Bluetooth anyway. And they were starting to view it as a legacy technology rather than a current, you know, currently active one that the majority of people would use. Now, I know there's audiophiles out there that will tell you that if you're trying to push high quality audio over Bluetooth, it doesn't work very good. It doesn't sound as good. And there is argument for that as well. All right, questions so far? All right, specialized hardware that you can utilize for laptops to make them more efficient would be docking stations, express cards, batteries, power adapters, cable locks, and biometric authentication. Although these aren't necessarily all limited to laptops, they were just nice little additions that they have made over time. First one is the docking station. Can any tell me what the difference is between a docking station and a port replicator? Anyone want to take a guess?
From the picture, maybe the docking station, you can like attach it to more than one system.
Oh,
You can charge your laptop from a docking station.
okay, it's a guess.
It looks like it's like the docking station, like
Oh.
external, and the other one you plug into the computer.
That's pretty solid, Frank.
And can't you attach, like, you can use the regular computer with the docking station if you dock your laptop? Is that possible?
You're walking down the right path. Now, essentially, a docking station is viewed right here. This would be a docking station. So underneath your laptop, you would see a little strip, you know, with clips on it, that when you would go into the office, say, you know, if you worked at home and you worked at an office, when you came into the office, you could clip this down onto the docking station. It would match up to it. The pins would come in and you would create a connection and essentially already have all the stuff you would normally have for a regular desktop, but it's your laptop. So it'd be hooked up to multiple monitors. If you had multiple monitors, you could have a wired keyboard, mouse, all kinds of fun stuff like that already hooked up. Your wired internet, you know, hooked up to your phone. If you have a network-based phone, all that stuff can already be established, and you wouldn't have to reconnect all those wires every single time you came in. You just came in, slapped it down on the dock, and everything was up and running for yourself. So essentially your laptop would then function as a desktop for the most part. What could we see would be the problem with having a docking station like this? I'll give you a hint. It's similar to the motherboards.
Got to go to the manufacturer.
Okay. You're on the right path.
Oh, you have to like buy a specific one for your laptop?
That's it right there. It is specific to that make and model of laptop. And the docking stations, they weren't cheap either. So if you have a variety of different laptops in your office and you have to have specific docking stations for each type of these, it begins to become pretty expensive pretty quickly. A lot of companies were using standardized laptops. We only use, this model of Dell or HP or whatever. So if I was in the Jacksonville office and I went up to the DC office, I could walk in, go to one of their little cubicles or temporary workstations that they have set up for office, for people in the company who pass through. I could walk in, just dock in, and all of a sudden I've got all my stuff good to go. But that's only possible if everybody's essentially using the same equipment. That becomes problematic as you're starting to upgrade equipment, because you're not necessarily going to do it all at one time. You may roll it out just as old computers are dying, and then it starts to become an issue because now you're having to maintain two types of docking stations, and it's rather frustrating. So another way you could get around that would be to use something called a port replicator. Now, a port replicator can do pretty much everything that the docking station does, except you're not actually physically having to lock down your computer into that docking station. You're essentially taking a USB-C port connector and plugging it in, and then you will have an external piece kind of like this sitting out there that you could plug in all the monitors, keyboards, internet connections, phones, all that stuff could be already set in that. And then when you come in, you just dock it into the USB-C port on your laptop, and it operates basically the same. So you don't necessarily have to have that manufacturer specific docking station. You can use a bunch of different types of laptops and manufacturing models and stuff like that, just so long as they have that USB-C port connection. Questions so far? Third. Specialized hardware. I think we mentioned these yesterday, these express cards like this. They would go into these little card slots on the side of the computer that Marvin was showing us yesterday.
Yes, sir.
And what was it? I've never actually used these, but they called them for short the PCM CIA, Personal Computer Memory Card International Association. And these were very, very specialized slots that would add functionality. Like if you didn't have a network card, you could add one. Or, if it didn't have a, wireless connection, you could add it this particular way. But nowadays, or it didn't have USB, you could add a USB port. Nowadays, what do we use to add? Like if it doesn't have Bluetooth or Wi-Fi or anything like that, what's the main thing we will use to connect it now? There we go. Emmanuel just showed it. Basically, it's the most common connector we have right now, the USB. So rather than having all these specialized different types of ports, you're starting to see most of the technologies merging and surrounding that USB technology. Makes it a lot easier. It's more universal. You don't have to make multiple different types, and it allows your product to be more widely used. And there were two particular sizes. There was the, was it a 34? It's 34 millimeters right here. And then there was the 54 millimeter. And the 54, as you can see, has that 34 millimeter pin slot, but it's still a broader card. And that would connect to the PCIe or the USB 2. All right. Batteries. One of the best and worst parts about a laptop. We've used a couple different types over the years with varying levels of success. First, I think most common in three, well, they just show two common types here, the nickel cadmium or NiCads, and then you have the nickel metal hybrids. Oh, and then they have the lithium ion, so there's the third. Those are the three most common that we have right now. I think everything is moving more towards that nickel metal hybrid. And I think they're moving away from the lithium ion. Oh, excuse me, they're moving towards lithium ion. My apologies. I always get the batteries confused. Lithium ion is probably one of the most energy dense ones you can use, but I think the longevity of the nickel metal hybrid is why a lot of people use those, and they tend to not necessarily lose their charge over time. So, and they don't require being exercised. Essentially, like we have to go full empty, full charge to make sure that it maintains that full charge on them. And lithium ion is better about that than the NiCads, but the nickel metal hybrid tends to be a little bit better. Any questions with regards to these? We will get more into disposal of the batteries a little bit later in the cohort. It's probably one of the last technical sessions we will be going over, because there is different disposal methods for each type, which you want to adhere to comply with environmental standards. All right. Power adapters. This is another place where they get you. If you ever have a power adapter go out on a laptop, you can't just run out and buy one. Even if you find one and it actually, the port that it has here, even if that fits, doesn't necessarily mean it's going to work. And you could damage your computer by using the incorrect one. So if you're using different generations of laptops and they still use a similar connector like this, they're going to be operating off of different voltages and different amps. And if you plug one in that has a much higher amp and voltage rating than the one it's needing for the computer, you can fry the internal device. I have done this in the past just because I wasn't aware, and I figured, hey, it fits, it must work, plugged it in, and it came on and then immediately went off. And then that was the last we ever saw of it, because it would not turn on anymore. The internal components had been fried. So when you're looking at these, on the back of your laptop, it should tell you what the voltage and amperage requirements are for it. And on the bottom of this middle piece on your actual power supply, power adapter, it should be there as well. Make sure they match up and would prevent damage to your actual equipment. And similar to a power supply within a computer, it converts AC to DC. Now, trivia question. If I'm operating in a car for a long period of time and they have the electrical output in the car, what kind of voltage is coming out of the car?
DC.
There you go. So your converter here, they would actually make a different piece that would come out of here to plug into the car, but the adapter will recognize that it's receiving DC and give DC on the more modern ones. Otherwise, you would need a specialized adapter for that. Questions so far? All right. The fun cable lock. This is the port we were talking about earlier. It's just an open port on the side of your computer. Doesn't seem like it does much, but it's actually meant for security, for you to actually physically secure your computer to your desk to prevent somebody from quickly walking off with it. Though, as I was always taught as a kid, all locks do is keep honest people honest. If somebody really wants that thing, they're going to get it. So it's mostly just a reminder, you know, for the opportunist thieves, essentially. But it does add a layer of security for your devices. And they come in two varieties. You can either have the key lock here, which has a little round key, or a combination lock. So, all right, biometric readers and biometric authentication. This would be yet another layer of security for your laptops. We talked about this earlier. You have this little flat strip right here on the side of a laptop. They're becoming more and more common, and it allows you to just kind of run your finger across it. It reads your finger. You can use that instead of a password to enter your computer, or you can use it as a form of multi-factor authentication to get into your computer to kind of increase the security. And you can have essentially drive level encryption on that computer that will only unlock if the biometric reads you that it is you. So again, you're setting up different layers of security for yourself. But most commonly, people just use it rather than putting in their password. So you just quickly scan your finger, kind of like your phone, scan your finger, your thumbprint, or your fingerprint, whatever, and it gives you access to the actual device. The other types they can use are facial recognition, which is improving at a pretty rapid pace. It was pretty bad early on. The early iterations that they had, you could literally just show a picture of the person and it will scan that two-dimensional image and let you in. But now it's actually looking for a three-dimensional image rather than a two-dimensional. And so it's becoming a much more robust form of security.
Anybody updated their iPhone recently? There was an iPhone update that came out this week, and one of its updates was, I want to know if anybody has already done it. Speak on what it was about. If you don't know, I'll just tell you. Okay. So it was to scan your face with your mask on successfully. So the whole goal was to, evidently Apple knew what has been going on for some time now. They made an update that would allow your phone to be able to recognize you even with your mask on. I just like how technology continues to move. Nothing stops it.
But didn't it require certain parameters though? Like you had
Of
to have
course,
a watch and whatnot.
of course, and I bet it's still a work in progress, but the ability to attempt to try to make it easier, because the only other way you get around that is by you got to pull the mask down to do it. So I think it's fascinating as things happen, we adjust accordingly. Nothing slowing down technology. So the goal is to get in. I always think about it like hopscotch. Is it hopscotch or double dutch? You gotta look double dutch. Thank you, Amber. You gotta catch that, because I'll never be able to catch it. I'm just let you know that right now. But you gotta find that time, the opening, jump in, and try to stay in as long as you can, because you're gonna continue to learn. The learning doesn't stop.
Yes, Amber.
Was I the only one that had to do that for Coursera? I had to like scan my face and then turn to the left and turn to the right. I think it was because I had taken classes before when we used that. So when it merged with Generation, I had to like verify myself. I was only one.
Interesting. I did not have to do that when I logged
I
in.
had to show my ID.
Anybody else? I know Avery said that he used Coursera for another course, but that's interesting. I'm gonna have to look that up, Amber. Go ahead, Will.
So just to confirm, as Mr. Kelly said, the facial recognition is improving. Like it's actually like improving as in like more higher demand. It's like people are really considering using it now, like in the work.
What I mean by improvement is the success rate for the actual scans is much higher, meaning you're not having too many false positives.
False positives.
Or
Gotcha.
false negatives, because like with any type of biometric technology, they have to determine like how many false positives you get, how many false negatives you get, and then you find that level where it's acceptable, and then I can't remember what it's called, where those 2 points actually intersect, and that's the number you're looking for on a biometric device as to your level of acceptance for failure. Now, if you're going for extremely high security, false negatives aren't really going to be your worry. So you're not so much worried about false negatives. It's the false positives would be your worry, because you don't want them to have access to that, high level security information or whatever. So, it's going to vary depending on personal needs. Like if it's just your personal cell phone, you don't keep a lot of real proprietary information on there, not a lot of deeply personal information, you could have a low level for false positives and false negatives, and that would be acceptable. And that was like the early iterations of facial recognition and fingerprint recognition on the phones.
Can you clarify what's false positives and false negatives?
Well, false positive would be like if my son picked up my phone and held it up to his face, and he's able to get into my phone because his phone thinks he's me because the facial features are similar enough. But he shouldn't be granted access to my phone because he's not me. So that would be a false positive.
False positive, because it's
So
positive.
you are incorrectly granted access to the device.
It's positive because he's getting access to the device.
Yes.
So
And a false negative would be, I'm trying to get into my phone and it keeps going, scan again, or not recognized. So it's not recognizing me.
I know.
So that would be a false negative.
Okay, that's good to know. I think I really wanted to ask that. All right, so it's improving, much more robust for security.
Yes. Now, whether or not people want that, that's a whole different conversation.
Yikes. Yeah, right. Thank you.
So the technology is improving, not necessarily the people's desire for that technology. Those are 2 different conversations.
Gotcha. Thank you.
So, all right. Any questions so far on that? All right. So here is a look at some of the physical ports on a laptop that you would typically see. Here is the optical drive, which is kind of going by the wayside. You would have the speaker microphone ports, which are still very much in use right now. Here is a look at the cable lock without something actually in it. Then you would have your DC jack on the side, which would be your power input, your older USB 2.0, and then the 3.0 USBs right next to it. As you can see, the blue bars in them. And you do want to be mindful of which ones you're using if you're using multiple devices, because some devices don't necessarily require a lot. So if you're going to be plugging in a corded keyboard into the side of this, you're going to want to go ahead and use up the USB 2 port, because the keyboard isn't going to push a lot of information through it. But if you're going to have, a high speed, like an external graphics card or something like that, you're going to want to use the USB 3 or the USB-C, and not essentially bottleneck it by trying to go through the USB 2, where you would lose the vast majority of the functionality of it. All right. Right here, we have the HDMI port, as we were showing that one yesterday. And then you have your network or Ethernet port. And then you have a VGA port, which we almost never see on laptops nowadays. It's typically just a USB-C or the HDMI. And then the SD cards, as we were kind of going over these. And then there's Magic Gate. Does anybody know what that is? Anybody? I'm not very familiar with these myself. I think they were proprietary to Vizio or something like that. And I believe they were more of like a display port. But that's not typically one you will see come up. Any questions with the bulk of the ports you will see on the side of a laptop typically? So, but nowadays, like we were saying, the VGA port would be gone. You would typically see a USB-C and then probably 2 USB 3s next to it. And then they would probably have a display port for Microsoft PCs or a Thunderbolt connector for Macs. All right, here we go. Here's Mac. So you have your headphone jack, your optical drive, which is pretty much going away now. The locking port, USB 3s, but they have them white instead of blue, probably for aesthetic reasons, knowing Mac. And then you would have your Thunderbolt, your Ethernet, FireWire, which they do not have FireWire in any of their laptops anymore. That has been weeded out essentially. And then the MagSafe, which is their power port. They clip in with magnets rather than a physical port you plug in, which decreases the opportunity for damage on the actual power pins. Any questions so far with the ports on a Mac? All right. All right, display features and functionality. Since we were moving away from, oh, go ahead, DJ.
I don't know how well I'm gonna be able to use my voice, but I was just wondering how they were able to use magnet charger.
How they're able to use the magnets for the charging, well, without damaging internal components.
Yeah.
Well, it's much like they, in the old mechanical hard drives, they use magnets in there as well. And they use a shielding, and it's not necessarily a powerful magnet. And the magnet isn't internal to I don't believe it's internal to the actual computer. The magnet is actually in the power cord itself. And it is a very low power magnet, but they do use a little bit of shielding on the inside to help protect components as well as distance. Does that make sense? All right.
Yeah.
So moving away from CRT monitors and moving towards the liquid crystal displays, LCD monitors, that actually was one of the main things allowing for the creation of laptops in general. Because nobody in their right mind would want to carry around a CRT monitor, no matter how portable they told you it was. So the components within the laptop that kind of make it possible, obviously you have the screen itself. There is the inverter inside the screen, which does what?
Convert DC to AC.
It converts DC back to AC, so that can power what?
The fluorescent bulb.
CCFL bulbs. Perfect. The Wi-Fi antenna, which would be built essentially around the screen, in the back of the screen. The digitizer, the webcam, which is essentially becoming an inbuilt component of pretty much every all-in-one computer and laptop. With desktops, it really depends on the monitor you get, though people will tend to upgrade to a better cam anyway. And the built-in microphones to to allow for video conferencing. Questions so far? Quiet group today. All right. See if we can get someone to read here. Chris, can you please read for us?
Display features and functionality. Screen. Most laptops offer a range between 10 inches and 17-inch screens. Almost all laptops nowadays have an aspect ratio of 16 by 9 or 16 by 10. The typical resolutions are XGA, WXGA, or WSXGA. The most common display technologies used in laptops are LCD liquid crystal displays, CCFL backlights with fluorescent lamps, TN, cheaper with low power consumption and fast response, IPS, better color representation and wider angle viewing, LED lighting using diodes. Yes. Thank you. With low power consumption and OLED lighting using organic diodes, better image quality.
Excellent, thank you. Anybody tell me what XGA stands for? Nothing real fancy. Extended graphics array. And we know that, so what would WXGA stand for? So W would be wide. There you go. And any guesses on WSXGA? They probably should have gone with SWXGA, but that acronym might have already been taken. The wide super extended graphics array. So
That's called wide super.
wide super, yeah. I think SW would have been better. Super wide extended graphics array, but no, they actually went with wide super. Sometimes they will intentionally jumble up the acronym because the one that they want to use is already being used. And then unfortunately, sometimes they will reuse an acronym and you need to know what context they're speaking of to understand which acronym they mean. So
What was the A again?
array. An array is basically like a grid. All right, and back on what we were talking about yesterday. A or B, which one would gamers prefer?
B, definitely B.
Maybe what?
B.
You think they would prefer B?
Yeah.
No, A.
Okay, we got people switching back. A or B?
A for the refresh rate.
There we go. So what does A stand for? What does TN stand for? Marvin's giving you a hint.
Twisted numeric, twisted numeric,
There
twisted
you go. Twisted pneumatic.
pneumatic.
And what does IPS stand for? I'll give you the first one.
In-plane switching.
There we go. In plane switching. Those are the two broad types of LCD monitors you would be going for. So the in-plane switching allows for the much wider viewing angle. It's a much narrower viewing angle with twisted pneumatic, but you have faster response times.
So 10 is the answer.
Hmm?
So which one is the answer? The
For
TAA.
gaming, typically, you know, obviously this technology is improving over time, but technically they would state that twisted pneumatics would be the ones preferred by gamers, because typically you're going to be seated right in front of that monitor anyway. And so you're not worried about the viewing angle. You're more concerned with the refresh rate of that particular monitor. There were actually stories where somebody who wasn't aware of the different types of display devices, this was about 10 years ago, they were running a Madden tournament or something like that, and they just grabbed a bunch of different monitors and not paying attention to what kinds they were, and were throwing them up, you know, with the different PlayStations and Xboxes and stuff like that. And then about 20 to 30 minutes into the gaming, they started realizing that there were certain stations that they had set up that nobody was playing in, and certain stations that people were waiting in line to go ahead and play in for tournaments. And it came down to the specifics of the monitors. The in-plane switching monitors, nobody wanted to play on them because they wanted to have that advantage of the twisted pneumatic, or that really quick reaction time, and it gave them, you know, a little bit of an advantage over somebody with an IPS monitor. And then that quickly spread, and people realized which ones were which, and they would rather wait and play on a twisted pneumatic than play on a disadvantage of the IPS. All right. All right, so we were talking about this earlier. We have the inverter in there. If you have the CCFL bulbs in the backlit, if you have an OLED screen, it's not going to have an inverter in it. It is particularly for the fluorescent bulbs to allow them to get the AC power they need to actually function. And they typically state it is not recommended to change the inverter, since it can be very dangerous. It would typically be a field replaceable device. You would basically swap out the monitor if you are capable of that, or send it off for repair if you are not. The digitizer. This is, as we were talking about earlier, like on desktops, it's kind of like a pad where you can actually draw on it, and that art would be, or whatever you're drawing, would be reflected upon the screen. Who was it that was saying that their sister was in art and they have like 5 or 6 of those digitizers laying around the house? Was that
I think it
was
was
that you,
DJ.
Chris? Somebody in here was mentioning that
I think it
they're,
was DJ.
I think it was DJ.
yeah, DJ's sister did art and had several of these digitizers laying around, because they are extremely useful when you are trying to transfer into that medium. Some displays will have them built in. It's becoming more common now, and they're becoming much better now and more functional. Sorry, what, Bogus? Nope, never mind. All right. So touchscreens are starting to rise to the sensitivity level of a digitizer, but still some people prefer that dedicated device. All right, Wi-Fi antennas. Built into most PCs nowadays, but typically back in like 4 or 5 years ago, it was still predominantly to be a standard in a laptop, an upgrade in a desktop. But even if we didn't have it, we didn't have a Wi-Fi antenna, what would we use? Give you a hint, Emmanuel showed us one just a few minutes ago. Or if yours breaks, what can you do?
USB.
Yeah, they have little USB antennas that you can add to your computer to allow for Wi-Fi access. Some of them are nice little just nubs like he has. They have other ones that are a little more, like a little bigger. They'll have a much larger antenna on them that'll allow for a little more range. But troubleshooting Wi-Fi is always a fun one on laptops. A very common call you can get in IT is, I just got back from a business trip and I can't connect to the internet. This plays for laptops and mobile devices. What would be the first thing you would check if they said they just got back from a trip and they cannot connect to the internet?
The network settings.
What specifically would you look for?
SSID maybe?
SSID, maybe. You put that, but you've connected to this Wi-Fi before, had no issues with it before. It's saved. Avery gave you a big hint.
Sometimes it's not connected to the, see if the network is actually up on the laptop, or is it automatically connecting to?
The hint is you just got back from a trip.
Airplane mode.
Oh,
Yeah.
Airplane mode. Because what does airplane mode do?
it stops all network connectivity.
Stops cellular, stops network, stops wireless, everything. Anything wireless connection, it shuts it off. And on laptops, especially like 5 or 10 years ago, it was a toggle button on the actual laptop that you would toggle on or off for airplane mode. Phones, you actually have to go into the settings and check that. But that's one of the first things you check if somebody says they got back from a trip or something like that, and then they came into the office and now they have no network connectivity. So webcams and microphones are pretty much standard on all laptops today. They may not necessarily be the best quality, but they are there, which allows for video conferencing. And they are not necessarily standard on desktops unless you have an all-in-one. If you have an all-in-one, they typically will be built in there as well. They also have a small light in the lens, which is kind of nice, tells you that the camera is on and working, though if somebody actually gets in, they can tell the computer not to turn that light on and turn your camera on, which is why a lot of people will opt for the camera covers over their webcams as well. I don't think somebody's designed anything for the microphone yet, but that might be coming.
We were recently told, and you can look at you can Google it, Zuckerberg camera cover.
He used electric tape.
Use electric tape to cover that, because let it be known, we're in a heightened sense of security and exploits and compromisations where people can really get into your computer and then just they can just be looking at you and you not know. So he got accustomed to covering up his camera with electrical tape just off of just that prophylactically. And I think that was kind of telling, because he was doing this long before it became very prevalent like it is now. So
well, and there was a meme a little while back that was pretty funny, and it was like in the top it said 1950, and it said in 50 years they're going to have government listening devices in every home. And then it was like 2020, hey, listening device, please set a timer for 20 minutes.
Convenience versus security, right, Kelly?
So take it with a grain of salt. Yeah, it is that trade-off, convenience versus security. If you want more convenience, you're going to have to sacrifice security, and vice versa. If you want more security, You're going to have to give up convenience. All right, care and maintenance of an LCD. You typically will clean it with a soft dry cloth. You do not use window cleaner on an LCD. You can damage it. So soft dry cloth, dust it off. That's typically what you want to do. You don't want to touch it with your fingers. The old school LCD screens, not to be confused with a touch screen. That is very specific and meant to be touched. And it actually has a protective layer of glass between you and the actual LCD display. On just a plain LCD, that is not typically there, which is why when you touch it, the image distorts. And if you're distorting that image, you are damaging it over time. When you do that, eventually the damage becomes so great that the image will not be able to be generated fully, or you will get dead pixels, or broken parts of the screen. And anybody with young kids, if you have a flat panels TV and they get up and they realize if they touch it and it turns all fun and pretty colors, that's all well and good until they actually break it. So keyboards, you can use compressed air to clean out the keyboards. I knew a guy back in the day, actually made a pretty good living. It was about 20 years ago. He would basically go to garage sales, pick up keyboards for 25 cents, 50 cents, go home and literally soak the entire keyboard in a bucket of Dawn in water. And then it would just eat all of the dead skin off of it, come out, and they would look absolutely brand new. And he would just fully dry them out before he would use them again. And he would sell them for like 20 bucks. So he's buying them up for 50 cents or a quarter, puts minimal effort into them, resells them for 20 bucks. Can't do that nowadays, but back then it was a pretty good side hustle for him. But the key was don't plug it in while it's still wet. If the keys are sticking and air, is not working, the compressed air or a electronics vacuum is not doing a good job getting all that stuff out there, you still have the keys sticking, you might actually have to physically remove the keys to get the gunk out from underneath it. General rule in most offices, they don't like you eating at your desk because you get your keyboard sticky, stuff gets spilled on the electronics. But then you have the other types of employers, they don't care so long as you're working. They would rather have you work through your lunch eating at your desk than getting away and actually enjoying your time. So, but IT will basically tell you we don't want you eating or drinking anywhere near your computer, period. Because accidents happen. Especially things like coffee with sugar in it. Sugar is the worst thing, and it makes all those keys stick. All right. Thank you. All right, as we talked about, just basic maintenance on the computer. Don't touch the screen. If people do, try to use a soft, dry cloth to go ahead and clean it off with. Do not apply heavy pressure because you can actually damage the crystal display behind it. Use compressed air when trying to clean out keyboards, or a electronics vacuum. If that still doesn't work, remove the keys and try blowing it out again. And then if you do have a damaged screen, you're going to flip out that screen, take the whole screen panel off and replace the whole thing, not actually try to repair it yourself. It is a field replaceable device. Basic troubleshooting on laptops, different common issues you may come across, especially with the display. If you get that black ring around whatever you're watching, if you've ever had that happen, that's typically where the resolution you are set at. You're trying to watch something at a higher resolution than what is actually set. So it's trying to shrink that image down to give you that resolution that you need. So in order to kind of get past that, you do want to try to set to a higher resolution in order to gain full visibility. Dead pixels. What were the two ways you could fix dead pixels we talked about yesterday?
Send it back or deal with it.
There you go. That's basically the only way to deal with there you got with dead pixels. Send it back or deal with it. Fuzzy text, run it at a higher resolution. You can check it in your display properties and effects, see if that's causing it as well. Randomly shutoffs. Check your refresh rate. And the other one is black screen on startup. It is possibly your video card. Start it up in safe mode to see if that allows you to check the drivers, see if your drivers need to be updated or if your video card has died. Other than that, that's typically the basic troubleshooting for laptop displays, though we do have some labs that should go along with that as well in Lab Sim and Test Out. All right, so configuring hardware and components. Does anybody know off the top of their head what a partition is in a hard drive and what that means?
When you can operate two operating system on the same hard drive, because you partition it that way. Like it's like
that's one way you can use it. Yeah, you can partition it off and essentially operate, have a full other operating system and memory and all that stuff dedicated on that particular hard drive. When we mention recovery partition, what does that make you think of?
Party.
Sorry, Ashton, what'd you say?
Parity. Or RAID. When you say recovery partition, I'm referring to hard drives.
Okay. Well, this is like, when we're speaking of partitions, you're essentially taking, you have a 100 gig hard drive and they're going to break it up into little chunks. You're going to partition pieces of it off and kind of segment them away from each other. So kind of what Jermaine was talking about, say you have a 100 gig hard drive, you want to take like 30 gigs, block it off and say, okay, I'm going to run Kali Linux on that particular partition. So when I start up my computer, I can identify which partition I want to work from and say, okay, I want to jump into Kali Linux. I'll jump in, I'll have my operating system going, and then I'll have essentially a total of 30 gigs of memory to work from. I think Kali only takes up about 8. And so you would have, 22 gigs of memory for other applications and stuff like that. And that would, when you're inside it, it would be like you had a 30 gig hard drive you're working from. Now, a recovery partition would be basically all the original settings, operating system, everything would be stored in there, a copy of it in case something went catastrophically wrong. You could reach back into that partition and it could reset everything back so that it was like it was brand new. Does that make sense? All right. So basically, whenever you hear somebody talking about partitions, all they're doing is taking a whole hard drive and just cutting it up into chunks for different purposes. Excuse me. On each of these laptops, they will typically have a model and serial number stamped on the bottom of it, like we were talking about. Whenever you call in to try to get any kind of repairs, or somebody calls in to you to get some repairs, this is the main thing you're going to want to get from them, not necessarily relying upon their memory of what kind of computer they're actually functioning off of. This model and serial number on the bottom will tell you the exact year, make, and model of that computer. And then it will allow you to better diagnose what issues are going on and then be able to find out the best methods for repair. Upgrading and replacing memory in a laptop. Surprisingly, a lot of these steps are pretty much the same. Now with a laptop, unplugging it doesn't do us a whole lot of good. It's got the battery. But if you are able, go ahead and remove that battery, still discharge the capacitors, turn it off. And then thankfully on laptops, it used to be a lot more difficult. They've made it a lot easier in recent iterations. They have just basically a slot or a port that you can just open up that port. That's all you have to take off. All you have to unscrew is that particular port to open up to be able to get to the physical memory. So we can do that obviously before we reach in and start messing around with it. We want to have our ASD strap on. And then we open up, ground ourselves properly. We open up the cover. And the way the laptop memory sits in, it's kind of weird. If you remember on a desktop, they just laid in vertically and just docked in, and it stayed that way, just perpendicular to the physical motherboard. In a laptop, it doesn't operate that way because they don't have that kind of space to maneuver in. So the actual port for the memory in the laptop is on a hinge. So you will actually lift them up and you'll pull them out, and then you'll set a new memory slot in, and then you'll lay them back down. So they almost like lay down like dominoes on top of each other when sitting inside the computer. You can kind of see it. There's two memory cards right here, one laying directly on top of the other because it's hinged in. Then you remove the existing RAM, replace it with the new upgraded versions that you have. Yeah, M.2 would be more for storage, but yeah, you could dock that straight into the motherboard, like an M.2 on an actual motherboard. Yes, absolutely. Now, what is one danger you can run into when removing screws from a laptop that you typically don't run into on a desktop? It's something that they do differently.
Different size screws.
There you go. That is the biggest one. So what would be one method you could keep track of that stuff, Ashton?
What did you say you had, like a little board, or you can make a graph, or just screw organization?
Screw organization. I mean, there's multiple things you can do. Like I have a silicone mat that has a bunch of little depressions in it that I can put the screws in a geographical representation of whatever it is I'm taking apart, and I'll have two of them, one for internal, one for external. So, but I've seen people use just a piece of notebook paper. They rip it out, they draw a little square on it, and they'll put like a little arrow, which represents the front of the computer or the hinge of the computer, whichever orientation they want to remember. And then they'll just, as they pull the screws out, they'll put them on the paper and draw a circle around it, and then write like external or internal on it, or like an, I or E next to it, and they just map it out that way. So, I mean, it's just a quick, easy way if you don't have the mat with you or something like that. It's just trying to figure out a way to organize it, because they could use different thread counts, and worse, they could use different depths. So you may be putting a long screw into a short port, and then later on you go put a short screw in a long port, and it won't hold that particular item in place. It could come loose. It could, bang into something else and damage it. So mapping out your screws is very important. And then on like mobile devices, like phones and stuff like that, some of those screws are magnetic, some are not. So, I mean, that comes into play too. But definitely organize your work. And then if you've never worked on that particular type of computer or laptop before, as you're getting into it and taking the cover off, what's the first thing you should start doing?
Taking pictures.
Beautiful. Taking pictures so you know where everything goes. Excellent. Upgrading or replacing hard drives. Obviously, if you've never worked on this computer before, you want to read the documentation. Watch some video. If you can find videos on somebody doing it, watch somebody take it apart. You can see where they make mistakes. You can try not to make those same mistakes, and they might give you a heads up on areas where there might be problems as you're getting into removing particular items. So, but the documentation should give you a schematic and basically tell you where everything is located in it, because sometimes you can go in through the top, like this one here, where they're lifting up the touch panel for the mouse pad, and the hard drive is directly onto that. And other ones, it may be on the underside. So you have to go in through the bottom. This is a common thing with laptops. So sometimes something simple to do, you might have to pull out all the guts of the laptop to be able to get to that particular simple item just because of the way it is constructed.
That's similar to what I just had to do on Sunday with my brother's laptop because his hard drive died. And I opened the back and it was covered. Like everything was covered. Someday I'm like, how do I take out the battery? Put on YouTube, watch them do it, that NV3000 series. Okay, that's how you pull the battery. Pull the battery first. Okay, where's the hard drive at? And it was underneath a plating on the left-hand side. Cut my finger just to lift the plating up. And I'm like, but I got it done and installed the operating system on it though.
I mean, it can be very frustrating, and partly they don't want you working on it. They'd rather you take it to one of their technicians and have one of their technicians do it. Or if you get frustrated enough, buy the newest and best model. It's Apple was notorious about that with their iPhones forever, where they wanted to make it as difficult as possible to get into them. They didn't want to sell parts for them so that people could do repairs on their own. And finally, it ended up in a big lawsuit where they were basically told, yes, you do need to sell aftermarket parts so people can do repairs on their own if they so choose. You can void the warranty if you want, but people should have that option. Yeah, it encompassed almost all the mobile devices they had. So, all right, after you've got the new hard drive in, and everything's connected, you get everything back together, it looks good, powered on. First thing you want to do is go into the BIOS, confirm the new drive is working, installed, and the computer recognizes it. And then go ahead and install your operating system if needed. All right. Now, this is basically internal versus external components. If you're doing external components, they tend to be warm or hot swappable a lot of times, and you just need to be sure that you safely remove them, like with USB drives. Though they say hot swappable, I often say it is typically warm swappable, where you need to make sure you eject that actual device or drive so that it stops whatever processes it's doing and can be safely removed from the computer, so you don't damage the actual computer or whatever device you are particularly using. Does anybody remember what P&P means?
It's plug and play.
Plug and play.
Plug and play. Plug and play. That would be the technical hot swappable devices. They call them plug and play. So it'd be like printers, scanners, cameras, microphones, speakers, all kinds of stuff like that. General list that the computer has. When you plug it in, it recognizes what it is, has general drivers for it. Where do they keep these drivers? In this huge list of components for the computer? that you can use with it?
That is HCL,
HCL, what does it stand for?
hardware compatible list.
Excellent, thank you, Mogus. That's the basic list of drivers that comes with the computer and gives it, the most popular devices. And then you upload it or you plug it in, it should give you basic functionality. If you don't have all the bells and whistles available at that point, you probably just need to go out to the web, to the manufacturer's website, and download the updated drivers, and that will give you full access to the device rather than just the basic functions. Questions so far?
Can you repeat one more time what XCL one more time is?
HCL, the hardware compatibility list. Whenever you get a computer, first time you turn it on, inside the actual operating system and programming, they will have basically a list of the most popular devices that consumers use, and will have built-in drivers for them. So if you ever plug them in, they start talking to the computer recognizes what it is and will, basically be able to use it. Now, if it's close but not exact, they'll have basic functionality, like be able to turn on, if it's a camera, it might be able to start, recording or something like that, but you just won't get all the bells and whistles with it, like all the fun little functions to go with it. And then you would go out to the manufacturer's website, you would download the updated drivers, and then the computer would be able to have full use of that device at that point. Like if it was a webcam, now all of a sudden it will have HD capabilities, maybe it can record in slow motion, stop action, a lot of different functionalities could be added rather than just the basic turn camera on, turn camera off.
Okay, got it. HDL then. Right.
HCL.
HCL.
Hardware compatibility list.
Hardware compatibility list.
Yeah. All right. Tear down and rebuild procedure. Not too different than breaking down a regular computer from the basic step standpoint. You definitely want to use the manufacturer's documentation if you have it available. If not, download it, see if you can get some schematics. If you have access to or able to find videos on somebody doing a tear down on it, I highly recommend you watching it. Sometimes they're only about 5 minutes long, but it can kind of give you just a heads up as what you're about to get into, and possibly tell you, certain places where you might get hung up and help you avoid those frustrating situations. Make sure you have the right tools. Like I mentioned earlier, my brother said every tool is a hammer if applied properly. That's not necessarily the case you're going to want to use with delicate electronics. You're going to try to have a pretty versatile toolkit, something along the lines handy, especially with mobile devices. They have a bunch of different types of security screws and stuff like that. You want to use the right type so you don't strip out the screws. That's really bad typically when you do that. Make sure all data is backed up before you ever crack that case, so that in case something bad happens, because sometimes they do, all that data is saved. You don't lose whoever's work that is entrusting you to fix their computer. Ground yourself with an ESD, and then you start removing express cards, flash, all external devices, shut down the notebook, disconnect the AC adapter. Older versions of batteries, they were quite easy. They just had a little clip. You pushed up the clip, yanked out the battery, you're good to go there. Newer versions, the battery is internalized in the computer. So unfortunately, you have to start breaking the case open before you can actually disconnect the battery physically. And then you follow the manufacturer's documentation on how to safely tear down that unit, and make sure you are mapping out your screws and connectors and components so you know exactly where they go, taking lots of pictures along the way so that you can just follow that roadmap you've set for yourself in reverse. And then after all is said and done, you got everything put back together, you turn it on and pray it works. So hopefully if you've got everything connected and you've done it right, you're good to go. Now, like mobile devices like cell phones, I still remember very distinctly the first cell phone I did work on. It was right after Apple got busted for throttling older phones. And they said it was because of the batteries. And then so then the courts came back and basically said, well, then give people updated batteries, sell it to them cheap. So we get little $15 batteries, come home, and I do my phone first because I was going to do mine and my wife's. And of course, I had to make mine the guinea pig. So I go through, I do mine, everything goes perfectly. It's textbook. I put everything back together, it turns right back on. Easiest thing I've ever done. After seeing that, my wife's like, okay, now I'll let you do mine. Break it down, take it all apart. Everything's going great. Put everything back together. Screen won't turn on. Missed a connector or something. Took everything back apart, put it back together. Big lines through the screen. No matter what I did, I took this thing apart, put it back together about 8 times and still could not get this phone to turn back on and function properly. And by this point, obviously, that's like my wife's connection to everybody in her life is through this particular device. So about the 4th or 5th iteration, she is quite literally standing over me, waiting for me to get this done. So, but it also came down to these tiny little pins on the inside just weren't seated properly. So the first time you do it can give you a false sense of security because everything goes textbook. The next time you do it, because you're a little more confident, you don't run through as delicately as you did the first time. So, and when you get to the mobile devices, the little connectors they have on them are very, very sensitive, and it's very easy to break the pins. Thankfully, I didn't do that, but it is a possibility. All right, questions so far on a rebuild? Tearing down and rebuild. Always follow the manufacturer's warnings or documentation if at all possible. All right, I need to stop share for a second. I will reshare. Got a quick video. Loud. Not loud.
It is pretty loud.
What?
It is.
Loud. Okay.
Much better.
Better.
Yeah. All right, real quick question. Go ahead, William.
Yes, Professor Kelly. So I know once we get our certification, CompTIA, ideally, I don't think we're gonna be, but this is really good to know. But you're saying that we're gonna most likely give it up to someone that does mostly IT repair, things like that, when it comes to this, or
Depends.
and work towards that.
Depends.
Depends.
It depends. Yeah. On laptops, certain things you can go ahead and upgrade, no problem. Hard drives, you should be able to swap out. Memory, RAM, you should be able to swap out. Now, if you're talking about replacing like the antenna for the Wi-Fi, you might pass that up. If you're talking about a inverter, you might pass that up to somebody else. Sometimes even replacing a whole screen, you might go ahead and pass that up. It depends.
So it just depends, and then most likely, and in every even in every job, they're not. Some will have a full staff, and they'll be able to do it. Some will have a smaller staff, and most
Yes.
likely
So
your supervisor's
smaller
going to be
companies, you will be required to wear more hats. You will be, IT security and desk support. If you're in a
Yeah.
smaller company, if you're in a much larger company, your roles are going to be much more specialized.
Right.
You may spend years in IT and never actually physically take a computer apart because you're just doing remote desktop or specialization work and stuff like that. And other people, they love hardware. They spend a lot of their time just working on hardware.
Interesting. Wow. So yeah, it depends though. I know what you mean. I got you. Thank you.
No problem. All right, we got some like only one answer on Nearpod.
I didn't hear you, Kelly. Say it again.
Only one person's answered so far on Nearpod.
No questions popped up on my Nearpod.
Are you looking at the shared screen or the Nearpod? It should be in
Mine
there.
either.
Oh yeah, to actually go to the question, I had to like skip ahead in the video because it doesn't play on the Nearpod on our side, and it's like connected to like when the video like pops up.
Okay, so you got to play the video on your side specifically.
Yeah, I just skipped to the blue dot, the first blue dot.
Okay, that's where it is. All right, we'll go ahead and go ahead and pace along just for pacing here. Yeah, on your Nearpod, if you skip ahead to the second blue dot, you should have a little poll real quick. Also, what did the technician not do when opening up that we had just discussed?
Did not take a picture.
Power.
Didn't take a picture. That's a good one. What else?
I didn't see him power off or power down.
Okay. Didn't verify power was off. Something else too. It's the difference between a desktop and a laptop or a mobile device.
A screw.
What about him, Jack? You're right there.
He didn't place the screw in an area where it would be safe.
He just threw him in a pile on his side, right? So excellent. All right, let's go ahead and finish up here. Probably just about another 8-10 seconds. All right. Stop share. Jump back into it. There we go. All right. Safe handling guidelines with a laptop. Some of this is, it appears to be common sense, but it's very often we don't really adhere to it. So you never hold the laptop by the screen because you can bend, crack, break that screen. It says always carry a laptop with both hands. Hold it with both hands. More often, unfortunately, people don't do that. They grab it by the corner, hold it like a tray, like a waiter, something along those lines that increases the chance, the components getting bent or cracked internally, and then or increasing your likelihood of dropping it as well. Never immerse a laptop in liquid. That's typically true for almost all components or anything electronic. You don't want to submerge it in any kind of liquids unless it actually is built for that. The exception, I guess, would be the mineral oil that you saw used for the immersed computer. That is also a very, very specialized situation. If it's not a touch screen, don't touch the screen. You can break it. And when transporting it, always use the case, but please be sure to turn that laptop off before you put it in the case. Otherwise, it's essentially like putting it in the microwave. A lot of people, you see them carry it like a briefcase up under their arms. Again, that increases your likelihood of dropping it, or somebody could bump into you. You can bang it into something, and in such case, damage the screen or internal components. Always lay it on a flat surface. Don't put it on a pillow or a towel or anything like that, because you will essentially suffocate it. It will overheat. And either at best, you're decreasing the lifespan of the unit. At worst, you could be essentially killing it because it can overheat and fry the components. Always can close it. If you're going to close it from the center of the lid. That prevents you from bending the screen in any which way. So you always grab it from the central point and close it there. That allows for even pressure. Don't use like a terry cloth to clean your laptop. Always use a soft cloth and try not to use any type of cleaning solutions. Any questions with regards to laptops? We will obviously get into this a little more. Depth with other T sessions. This is just kind of a basic overview of laptops and hardware. All right. Throughout that technical session, you should be able to describe how a laptop functions similarly and differently to a desktop. Be able to describe the functions and components within the display of a laptop and understand the basic steps of installing various components within a laptop using similar steps that we have used prior in actual desktop insulation, a lot of the safety stuff is the same. The general steps are pretty close to the same. You just need to make sure to make minor modifications and always check the manufacturer's documentation. With that,